The fog off Lake Ontario had settled low enough that morning to swallow the bottom 3 floors of the Meridian Tower whole, leaving the glass upper stories suspended like something disconnected from the earth below. Marcus Rayleigh arrived before the cleaning supervisor's van had even pulled into the lot, which was saying something because the supervisor, a short man named Bogdan, prided himself on being first. Marcus had beaten him by 40 minutes. He parked the old Civic on the street instead of the staff lot to save the $4 fee, pulled his thermos from the passenger seat where his daughter had left a crayon drawing wedged under the cup holder. A yellow sun with 7 uneven spikes, and the words Daddy's work printed in 6-year-old handwriting that leaned slightly to the left, and walked through the service entrance with the quiet deliberateness of someone who had learned how to take up less space than a room allowed. He had been doing this for 3 years. Tuesday through Saturday, 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, floors 19 through 24 of the Meridian Tower in downtown Toronto, which housed the national headquarters of Northgate Infrastructure Partners, one of the 5 largest private infrastructure firms in the country. Marcus cleaned the offices where people decided which bridges got repaired and which ones waited another decade, which transit corridors received funding, and which communities were quietly told to be patient. He mopped floors that had never once registered his name. His daughter, Tess, was 6. She attended Lakeview Primary in Etobicoke, where her teacher sent home weekly reading logs that Marcus filled out in the kitchen after dinner, while Tess told him about a girl named Brenly, who had a hamster at home and brought photos every Monday. He knew which nights Tess slept poorly because of the cough that came every autumn. He knew she liked her toast slightly burnt and her orange juice without pulp. He knew that she fell asleep fastest when he read to her in a low, even voice, even if the book was something he had already read to her 40 times. He had learned the shape of fatherhood the same way he had learned everything useful in his life, not because someone guided him, but because leaving was not an option. His wife, Claire, had died 2 years and 4 months ago. He did not think about her in full sentences anymore. He thought about her in objects. Her mug still sat on the second shelf in the kitchen because Tess had asked him not to move it. The 23rd floor was quiet that morning in the way that expensive places go quiet when bad news is coming and everyone already knows it. Marcus pushed his cart off the service elevator and into the wide marble corridor, noting immediately that the boardroom lights were already on. That was unusual. The executive floor at Northgate did not typically have anyone present before 7, and the wall clock above the water feature read 6:14. Through the frosted glass panel beside the boardroom door, he could make out shapes, more than one. He counted the silhouettes the way he had learned to count things without appearing to count them, and arrived at 6 people seated around the long table before he looked away and focused on the corridor floor, which was where his job began and ended. He ran the polisher slowly. The machine made enough noise to explain his presence on the floor without requiring any other justification. The boardroom door opened twice in the next 20 minutes. Both times it was an assistant carrying something out, a tray, then a laptop bag. Both times the assistant walked past without registering Marcus the way people do not register background music in a restaurant. The third time the door opened, it stayed open, and a voice that belonged to a man Marcus recognized as the CFO. He had seen the headshot on the company's framed executive wall on floor 22, said something sharp and impatient to someone still inside the room. The CFO's name was Roland Thakier. He was tall in the way that certain men use height as argument. He wore the expression of someone who had decided the outcome of a meeting before it began. A folder slid off the edge of the credenza beside the open door. It did not fall fully. It tipped, spreading 2 or 3 loose pages across the threshold between the boardroom and the corridor, which had technically not been fully closed. Marcus moved toward it without thinking because that was also his job. He bent to retrieve the pages. One was a cover sheet. One was a summary of some kind. The third was a numbered schedule, dense with financial figures, and his eyes caught one line the way your eye catches a misprint on a page you are reading quickly. Not because you are searching for it, but because something in your brain flags it before the rest of you has registered why. It was a liability figure, a pension obligation estimate for 3 infrastructure subsidiaries, Calgary, Windsor, and Halifax. The number was expressed in millions, and the number was wrong. Not wrong in the way that might be a rounding convention or a conservative estimate. Wrong in the direction that made a company look considerably weaker than it was. Marcus had seen this kind of wrong before. He had spent 4 years at the University of Waterloo in the Applied Mathematics program before life accelerated past whatever he had imagined for himself. He had spent an additional 2 years working actuarial models for a benefits consulting firm in Mississauga before Claire got sick, and the hospital visits began overlapping with client calls in ways that stopped being manageable and became something else. He had made a decision that felt like sinking at the time, and that he had since learned to call a different word. He placed the pages back on the credenza. He did not immediately move away. His eyes found the number again. Roland Thayer appeared in the doorway. He looked at Marcus the way certain people look at furniture that has been left in the wrong room. Then he looked at the pages and picked them up, himself. Marcus turned back to the polisher. Inside the boardroom, a voice he had not heard yet. A woman's voice, low and precise, said, "Roland, the Pension Standards Act revised its provincial application guidance in the last quarter. If these figures are still pulling from pre-revision tables, we may be using the wrong discount rate entirely." There was a pause. Then Roland Thayer said, with the particular flatness of someone who is not actually uncertain but wishes the question had not been asked, "The models have been reviewed." The woman's voice said, "By whom?" Marcus kept moving. He was not supposed to be part of this conversation. He had no credentials in this building beyond a name badge that listed his first name and his employee number. He had a daughter who had asked him that morning whether he would be home in time to watch a documentary about sea otters she had found on the library tablet. He had 3 more floors to clean before 2 o'clock. He was at the far end of the corridor when he stopped. He stood still for roughly 4 seconds. Then he turned and walked back. He knocked on the open boardroom door. He had never knocked on a boardroom door in this building before. His knuckles felt strange doing it. Every head in the room turned. There were 7 people, not 6. He had miscounted. 4 men, 3 women, varying levels of surprise at being interrupted by someone in a gray uniform with a Northgate service badge who was not carrying coffee. The woman who had asked the question about the discount rate was at the near end of the table. She was perhaps 50, with reading glasses pushed up into dark hair that had begun going silver at the temples. Her name, Marcus would learn later, was Patricia Vance. She was the chair of Northgate's board of directors and had flown in from Vancouver the previous evening specifically for this meeting, which was the final review before the company submitted a voluntary insolvency restructuring application to its primary creditors before the markets opened. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Marcus said. Roland Thayer said, "This floor is restricted during board sessions." Marcus looked at him once and then looked at Patricia Vance because she was the one who had asked the right question. "The pension liability figure on that schedule," he said. "I think it's using the wrong base rate." No one spoke for a moment. The fog outside the floor-to-ceiling windows had begun to thin, and the lake appeared below in long gray pieces between the gaps. Roland Thayer's voice hardened. "You think, yes, sir, you clean floors, yes, sir. But the Pension Benefits Act guidance updated the going concern discount rate for multi-jurisdictional plans last November. If the liability schedule is still using the pre-amendment rate, the obligations is overstated. And if the obligation is overstated by the amount I just saw on that page, the company's net asset position looks substantially worse than it actually is." The silence that followed this was different from the first silence. The first had been dismissive. This one was calculating. Patricia Vance took off her reading glasses. She looked at Marcus the way someone looks at something they have not decided how to categorize yet. She said, "What's your name?" "Marcus Riley." "How long have you worked here, Marcus?" 3 years. Roland Thayer stood. His chair made a sound against the floor. "Ava," he said, and then caught himself. "Patricia, we do not have time for this." Patricia said, "What is your background, Marcus?" Marcus hesitated because this was the part of the answer that required the most compression. "Applied mathematics, Waterloo. I left before I finished and went into actuarial modeling for a few years. Then some things changed and I took this job." The youngest person in the room, a woman in her late 20s named Sasha Brennan, though Marcus did not know her name yet, was already pulling something up on her laptop. She typed for 30 seconds. Then she looked up. "The November update," she said quietly. "He's right. We're using 3.8%. The revised guidance puts the going concern rate at 4.6 for multi-jurisdictional plans." Roland's jaw tightened. "That's a draft guidance. It hasn't been formally adopted. It was finalized January 9th, Sasha said. She turned the laptop so the board chair could see the screen. Patricia Vance looked at the screen. Then she looked at the liability schedule in front of her. Then she looked at Marcus. "Come in," she said. Marcus left his cart in the corridor. He stepped into the boardroom and felt immediately how different the air was on the inside of the glass, contained, pressurized, full of things that had been said and not yet resolved. He was aware that his shoes left faint marks on the boardroom floor that would need cleaning later, possibly by himself. "Walk me through what you saw," Patricia said. Marcus approached the table carefully. He placed one hand on the edge without leaning on it and looked at the schedule. The Windsor and Halifax plans are legacy-defined benefit structures. If the discount rate is 3.8 instead of 4.6, you're adding roughly $60 to $70 million of phantom liability to the consolidation. Maybe more, depending on the plan membership age profile. He paused, which changes the leverage ratio. And if the leverage ratio changes enough, you may not actually be in breach of the covenant that triggered this meeting. Another silence. Roland Thayer said, "Our actuarial team reviewed these figures." Patricia did not look at him. She was looking at Sasha's screen. "When? December?" "Before the January 9th finalization," Patricia said. This was not a question. Sasha was already running numbers. Her fingers moved quickly, and she had the focused stillness of someone who is used to finding other people's errors and has learned to do it without editorial comment. "Recalculating with the revised rate," she said. "Give me 2 minutes." The room held itself in a kind of uncomfortable suspension. Marcus stood near the table and did not move. Roland Thayer stood at the far end with his arms folded, looking at Marcus the way you look at something that has arrived uninvited and proved more complicated to remove than expected. One of the other board members, a heavier man named Frederick, Marcus still did not know surnames, leaned forward. "If the liability is overstated and the covenant isn't actually breached, why are we filing today?" No one answered immediately. That itself was an answer. Patricia said, "That's a good question, Frederick." Sasha looked up from her screen. Her expression had changed into the particular kind of alertness that data produces in people who take data seriously. With the revised rate, the pension obligation drops by approximately $64 million. The net asset position improves by the same amount. She scrolled. The leverage covenant threshold is 3.2. Our ratio at the December filing was 331. She paused. At the corrected figure, it's 318. The room understood this before she finished the sentence. Patricia Vance understood it fastest. "We're not in default," she said. Sasha shook her head. "Not on this covenant." Roland Thayer uncrossed his arms. The actuarial review was conducted under reasonable professional standards. The January finalization was not available when the application was prepared last week, Patricia said. She was still not looking at him. "The January guidance was available last week." Roland said, "Guidance interpretation involves professional judgment." Patricia turned toward him now. Her voice did not rise. This was the most frightening thing about the way she handled it. There was no theatrics, no performance of anger. Just the steady precision of someone who has learned how to be exactly as direct as the situation requires. The interpretation resulted in a document that would have filed this company into voluntary insolvency, based on a figure that was $64 million wrong. "That is not a judgment call, Roland. That is an error." She paused. "Or something else." The room registered those two words differently than everything before them. "Or something else." Marcus watched Roland Thayer's face in that moment. He had been watching faces for longer than he watched numbers. He had learned to read the micro-adjustments people made when something landed too close to the truth. The slight reorganization around the eyes, the controlled breath, the decision in a quarter of a second about which expression to put on. Roland made that adjustment now. It lasted less than 2 seconds. But Patricia had been watching too. She turned to Sasha. "Pull the full actuarial file. I want to see the date stamps on every revision." Roland said, "I'll contact the actuarial firm directly." "Sasha will contact them," Patricia said. "I have the primary relationship with." "Sasha will contact them." Sasha was already reaching for her phone. Marcus took a small step back from the table. He was not sure whether he was still needed or whether the room had absorbed what he had brought to it and had moved forward into territory where he did not belong. He looked toward the door. Patricia Vance looked at him. "Stay," she said. He stayed. He thought about Tess. She had been dropped off by the neighbor's daughter, who was in high school, and sometimes walked her to school on mornings when Marcus's shift started too early. He thought about the crayon drawing under the cup holder in the Civic. He thought about the sea otters. The actuarial file arrived via shared drive within 12 minutes. Sasha went through it with the systematic efficiencies of someone who had decided to find what was there rather than confirm what she had been told was there. The room watched. Roland Thayer sat down again, which Marcus noted as the first time since he'd entered that the CFO had accepted gravity. "There are 2 versions," Sasha said. Her voice had lost its earlier tentativeness. "A December 14th version and a January 17th version." She opened both. "The December version uses 4.6. She stopped. "The January version uses 3.8. No one spoke. The rate was changed downward, Sasha said, after the guidance was finalized upward. Frederick said, very quietly, "Who made that revision?" Sasha checked the file metadata. "The access log shows a single authorized user account." She looked at the screen for a moment. Then she looked at Roland Thayer. She did not say his name. She did not need to. Patricia Vance rose from her chair. She walked to the window and stood with her back to the room for perhaps 10 seconds, which in the context of that morning felt very long. The fog had cleared enough that Lake Ontario was visible from edge to edge, flat and gray under a sky that had not decided yet whether it would give them any sun. She turned around. "What is the filing deadline this morning?" she asked. 9 o'clock, Sasha said. "We have 1 hour and 42 minutes. Call our restructuring council and tell them to stand down." Patricia looked at Roland Thayer with the full weight of everything that had surfaced in the past 30 minutes. "Roland, I'm going to ask you to go to conference room B with Howard and wait there until our general counsel arrives." Roland's mouth moved. He was composing something, selecting language with visible effort. "Patricia, if you're suggesting that I'm not suggesting anything yet," she said. "Go to conference room B," he went. Howard, a compact, serious man who had said nothing during the entire exchange, followed him out. The door closed. The remaining board members sat in a silence that had the texture of something that had just been averted, not safely arrived somewhere, but pulled back from an edge. Patricia looked at Marcus. "You said the pension plan membership age profile would affect the recalculation." "Yes," Marcus said. "Do you know how to run that?" "I would need the plan member data." Patricia looked at Sasha. Sasha was already pulling up the HR system. What followed was 2 hours that Marcus would think about differently at different points in his life. At the time, it felt like concentration. Like the kind of focused problem he had always moved through more easily than the rest of living. The kind where the answer existed somewhere in the numbers if you looked at the right sequence, in the right order. He sat at the end of the boardroom table with a borrowed laptop and access to plan data he had no institutional authority to see, and he worked. Sasha worked beside him. They did not talk much because they did not need to. They had the same relationship with the data, respectful, systematic, unwilling to accept an answer that didn't close properly. By 8:40 a.m., they had a corrected consolidated liability schedule with proper rate documentation and a covenant compliance memo drafted by the board's restructuring council, who had turned around from driving to the filing office and was now on a video call from a parking lot in Scarborough. The filing did not go in at 9 o'clock. It did not go in at all. At 9:14, Patricia Vance sent a one-sentence message to Northgate's primary creditor contact. "The filing has been withdrawn pending correction of a material actuarial error discovered in pre-filing review." She did not explain more than that. She did not need to. The word material was doing the legal work. The word error was doing the political work. The phrase pre-filing review was doing everything else. By 10 o'clock, the corporate security team had been briefed, and Roland Thayer was still in conference room B, now with the company's general counsel and 2 people Marcus did not recognize, who had arrived with lanyards that said forensic in small letters beneath the Northgate logo. Marcus had been sitting near the wall again for the past 40 minutes. He had been offered coffee twice and accepted both times because he had eaten nothing since 5:15, and his side ached from where he had caught the edge of the cart in the service elevator. He was thinking about whether the school nurse would call if he didn't pick up Tess on time, and what the protocol was, and whether he had left the nurse's form with his information filled in, or whether that was still sitting in his jacket pocket from last week. Patricia Vance appeared in the doorway. She had been in and out of 3 different rooms in the last hour, moving with the particular kind of efficiency that belongs to people who are used to managing multiple things at the same level of seriousness simultaneously. She looked at Marcus. "Do you need to be somewhere?" "My daughter gets out at 3:15, he said. "What's her name? Tess?" Patricia said nothing for a moment. Then she turned to her assistant, who had been stationed outside the boardroom since 7 a.m., and was holding a tablet with the expression of someone who had stopped being surprised by this morning. "Call Lakeview Primary in Etobicoke. Explain that Tess Riley's father is detained at a work matter and ask them to keep her in after-school care until he arrives. Tell them the delay is authorized by the company." The assistant nodded and stepped away. Marcus looked at her. "That's not necessary, really. Neither was your company's solvency, apparently," Patricia said, "until 20 minutes before we were about to sign it away." He had no answer to that. She had not expected one. There was a moment, and he would return to this moment later, not with pride exactly, but with something that took him a long time to name, where Patricia Vance sat down in the chair beside him rather than across from him. Not the CEO position at the head of the table, just the chair beside him, the way you sit down next to someone when you want to talk rather than at them. "You left Waterloo when?" she asked. "Before 4th year. Why?" He answered the way he had learned to answer, honestly, without apology, without the softening that makes hard things easier to receive but somehow smaller in the telling. My wife got sick. I needed to be home more than I needed a degree. Patricia said, and after she died, I had Tess. I needed work that let me be there for school and for sick days and for all the things that don't fit around a demanding schedule. He looked at the window. This job gave me that. I'm not ashamed of it. I didn't suggest you should be, Patricia said. A lot of people do, he said. Not out loud. She was quiet for a moment. What did you do in actuarial work before you left that career? Pension plan modeling mostly, multi-employer plans, some municipal liability work. Did you enjoy it? This was not the question he had expected. Yes, he said. I was good at it. But good at something isn't always enough reason to do it. What is enough reason? He thought about it. Whether it fits around everything else you have to hold. Patricia looked at the table. Then she picked up the corrected actuarial schedule, the one that Marcus and Sasha had rebuilt from the ground up over the past 2 hours, and held it the way you hold something that has changed its meaning since you last looked at it. I'd like to offer you a position, she said. Not today and not as a formality. I mean a real one. Financial review, specifically pension and liability modeling. Our internal team missed something that could have cost this company 4,000 jobs and 12 years of infrastructure commitments across 3 provinces. I need people who actually look at numbers rather than manage narratives about them. Marcus said, I pick up Tess myself, every afternoon. Then your hours would reflect that. She has appointments sometimes. Medical stuff, some weeks more than others. Then you leave when you need to leave. He looked at her. He was not a man who trusted easily, not because he was cynical, but because he had learned that generosity offered under pressure sometimes evaporates when the pressure does. Would this still be the offer in 2 weeks? He asked. When the urgency fades? Patricia almost smiled. The fact that you ask that question is additional evidence that I'm making the right offer. She placed the schedule back on the table. Yes, it would still be the offer in 2 weeks. Marcus was quiet. He looked at his hands on the edge of the table, the same hands that had held a mop handle at 6 that morning, that had adjusted Tess's backpack straps in the school drop-off lane the morning before, that had run the numbers that stopped a company from dismantling itself on incorrect data. One more thing, he said. Patricia waited. The cleaning staff on the service floors. Half of them have been here longer than most of the analysts. They have no dental plan. They have rotating shifts that change every 4 weeks with 2 days' notice. He looked at her directly. Whatever you're trying to fix about how this company missed what it missed, that's part of it. The people closest to the building always see more than the reports suggest. They just never get asked. Patricia Vance studied him for a long time. I'll take that under advisement, she said, which was not yes, but was also not the dismissal he had half expected. I'd rather you took it as a condition, he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, a benefits review for all non-executive staff will be on the agenda for the next board session. You have my word? He nodded once. Across the floor in conference room B, Roland Thayer was still talking to forensic accountants who had stopped believing him approximately 40 minutes earlier. In the boardroom, Sasha Brennan was compiling the full documentation package for the creditors and the regulators and whoever else would need to understand in ordered, dated, verifiable detail exactly what had happened to the numbers between December and January and why. Outside, the fog had pulled back from the tower entirely, and the city below was fully visible for the first time all morning. The lake broad and cold behind it, the Gardiner curving west, the buildings catching the mid-morning light in long, pale reflections. Marcus stood at the glass for a moment before he went to collect his cart from the corridor. He stood there the way you stand somewhere when you know it is the last time you will look at it the same way. He thought about Claire, not in the incomplete way he usually thought about her now, in objects and habits. He thought about her in a full sentence, for the first time in longer than he could remember. She would have laughed at this. She would have laughed and then said something quietly devastating about how the world only notices what it has overlooked once it needs saving. He picked up his cart. He finished the floor. He did it the same way he had done it every morning for 3 years, methodically, without complaint, without requiring anyone to see him doing it. Old habits were harder to leave behind than old jobs. He called the school at noon and spoke to the aftercare coordinator himself, because relying on other people's phone calls for things that mattered was a comfort he had never fully learned to accept. Tess was fine. She had spent the extra time teaching another kid to fold paper frogs, which had been a thing Marcus had taught her the previous winter on an evening when the power went out and they sat at the kitchen table with a candle and a stack of old magazines. He picked her up at 3:40. She walked out with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and her face arranged in the slightly accusatory expression she deployed when he was late, and she had decided not to make a big deal of it, but also not to pretend it was fine. "You said 3:15, she said. "Big day at work," he said. She studied him. She had his eyes and Claire's way of using them. "Did you get in trouble?" "No," he said. "Did someone else get in trouble?" He thought about Roland Thayer in conference room B about the forensic lanyards. About the actuarial file with the two versions and the changed rate and the date stamp that would not cooperate with any innocent explanation. "Yes," he said. Tess seemed to consider whether this was satisfying. She climbed into the back seat and buckled herself in, which she had been able to do since she turned 5, and reminded him of this fact regularly. "Was it because of numbers?" she asked. Marcus looked at her in the rearview mirror. "How did you know?" She shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a 6-year-old who does not want to appear too interested. "You always come home different when it's numbers." He drove. The lake was on the right, flat and gray in the late afternoon, the fog entirely gone now. He thought about the folder in his jacket pocket. Not a job offer, not yet, just a piece of paper with Patricia Vance's direct line written on it in deliberate handwriting and a time for a call the following week. "Dad," Tess said. "Yes, the Sea Otters documentary is 48 minutes. If we have pasta for dinner, we'll be done in time." "Pasta it is," he said. She looked out her window at the city sliding past. Somewhere behind them, the Meridian Tower caught the last of the afternoon light on its upper floors and held it there for a moment. Something between a reflection and a reminder. Before the angle shifted and it was just glass again, rising out of the ordinary city like everything else that contained more than it showed.